He sold his blind niece for $20 million. A blind girl plays her final song on an old piano, completely unaware that her own uncle has just sold her to the most powerful black billionaire in the region. On her wedding night, she's led into a lavish mansion, where no one knows her life has already been traded like property. But what no one expected is that this blind girl would begin to unravel the heart of the man who bought her. And what happens after that night won't just be a wedding. Don't look away, because hidden beneath that elegant wedding gown is a truth that will shake you to your core. "She's blind," Mr. Mike said, his voice thick with frustration. "And I desperately need this money. So you're willing to sell your niece to me for $20 million? Jeffrey asked, his smile dark and wicked. "Yes, Jeff. I've tried everything for her. It's been ages since my brother died and left her in my care. Now it's time for her to repay me." "Fine, we have a deal," Jeffrey responded, his voice almost too eager. "One more thing, Jeff," Mr. Mike added, his tone lowering. "You have to marry her. Or do it however so people won't question me about her. She's still family." "Deal," Jeffrey responded without hesitation, his voice smooth as if he had been waiting for this moment. Maria sat at the old piano in the corner of the room, her fingers gliding over the keys in a soft, delicate melody. The song she played was a lullaby her mother used to sing to her as a child, before everything went wrong. She played it now, her heart heavy, her fingers trembling as the familiar tune filled the garden. The music was her only solace, her escape from the world of darkness. Her world was a lonely one filled with unseen battles and the silence of a girl who had never known the beauty of sight. Maria's blindness wasn't something that had always been a part of her. No, it had been the result of the fire, a fire that had consumed everything she had ever known. It was the fire that shattered her family, ripped away her parents, and left her in a world of darkness, both literally and metaphorically. The memories of that night haunted her. But it was the fire that also gave her a strange sort of clarity. It was a reminder of everything she had lost. After the fire, Maria was left with nothing but the ashes of her past and the haunting silence of her blindness. Her uncle, Mr. Mike, had taken her in after her parents' death. He was her father's brother, but even in his house, she often felt like an outsider. Living with Uncle Mike wasn't easy. His wife, Mrs. Ruth, had never been happy about Maria moving in. From the moment she entered their home, it was clear that Mrs. Ruth would never accept her as part of the family. "You could have just taken her to an orphanage," Mrs. Ruth had said one day when Mr. Mike made the decision. There was no kindness in her voice, only irritation. "Why bring that burden here?" But Mr. Mike insisted, "She's family. She's staying with us." Despite that, Maria never truly felt like she belonged. Matthew, her uncle's son, made her life even more difficult. He was cruel, always finding new ways to torment her. He would hide her walking stick, forcing her to stumble into furniture or walls. He would burst into laughter with his friends as she struggled to find her way around the house. It felt like they all viewed her as less than human, as if her blindness somehow made her invisible. As the days went by, Maria's world seemed to shrink even further. The piano, the only place she found peace, became her refuge. She poured all her emotions into it: sorrow, frustration, loneliness, her music telling a story no one else could hear. Even though Maria was blind, that didn't make her exempt from household chores. If anything, it seemed to make Mrs. Ruth more determined to make her work harder. She was taught to do everything from scrubbing the filthy floors to washing dishes and going to the farm to help with the harvest, despite her disability. Every time she stumbled, Mrs. Ruth's words would echo in her mind: "You have to pay for the food you eat and the roof over your head." It didn't matter that she couldn't see. If anything, her blindness seemed to make her even more invisible in the eyes of the family. Maria had no friends. The children at school didn't want to be around her. How could they? She was the blind girl with the ragged clothes and a smile that didn't shine like theirs. The only solace she had was the piano her uncle had bought her for her 16th birthday. To most, it was just an old instrument, but to Maria, it was her only friend, her only escape from the harsh realities of life. It had been tucked away in the corner of the garden by Mrs. Ruth, who always seemed to think it was a disruption. "Why bring such a noise into this house?" she had asked when her husband bought it. But Mr. Mike, who truly cared for her, insisted that it would be a gift for Maria to hold on to. But that was all it was, an object of comfort hidden in the garden, away from the household. The world around her was filled with chores, disdain, and bitterness. Her uncle, Mr. Mike, treated her like his daughter, but even he couldn't shield her from the daily cruelty of Mrs. Ruth and Matthew. They didn't have much, but in her uncle's eyes, she was still family. It wasn't much, but Maria felt something she had never felt before in her life, belonging. Even if the house was filled with tension, even if the chores were endless, Mr. Mike was the closest thing she had to a father now. But Maria wasn't like the rest of them. She was the poorest, the one who wore old hand-me-down clothes that barely clung to her fragile body, clothes that nearly looked like rags. The threads had long lost their color and the fabric was torn in places. But Maria never complained. She was grateful for it. She was grateful for everything she had, even if it wasn't much. At least she had a roof over her head. At least she had food to eat, even if she had to work for every bite. And at least she had the piano, even if it was locked away in the garden and only her hands could appreciate its beauty. Every day, she lived in gratitude for these small gifts, even if the world around her seemed to want to take everything from her. That evening, as Uncle Mike arrived home, he quickly grabbed Mrs. Ruth by the arm and hurried her downstairs to the garden. "We are rich," he whispered eagerly, his face lighting up with excitement, unaware that Maria had been sitting in the garden long before they came out. "How?" "I don't understand, Mike," Mrs. Ruth said, her voice laced with confusion. "We are 20 million richer now," Mike said, his eyes gleaming. "I finally decided to sell Maria off to the rich man I told you about before." Mrs. Ruth blinked, trying to process his words. "What? Sell her? But Mike, she's blind. How could that man possibly want her?" Mike tried to calm her, a grin spreading across his face. "I don't know, but I don't care. I'm just so happy with the money I forgot to even ask. We're set now." Mrs. Ruth's face broke into a smile, her eyes narrowing with greed. "Wow, this is good. But what does your friend want with a blind girl?" "I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. All I know is we're getting 20 million. That's all that matters right now," Mr. Mike responded, his voice filled with excitement. It was then that Maria, who had been quietly sitting in the garden, overheard their conversation. Her heart skipped a beat, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tears welled up in her eyes. And for a brief moment, she felt the overwhelming urge to scream. But she stayed silent, her emotions bubbling inside her as she tried to process the words she had just heard. She was being sold. Sold like some kind of commodity. The man she had trusted, the only one who had ever shown her kindness, was now making deals with her life as if she were nothing more than property. As she sat there trembling, Mr. Mike continued, "Jeff will marry her. He'll make it a wedding or whatever he wants. It doesn't matter to me," he explained casually, as if talking about someone else's life, not his niece's. "Oh wow," Mrs. Ruth said, a smile creeping across her face. "She actually got more than she deserves. It's a good deal for all of us." Maria's heart shattered at that moment. She had been nothing more than a burden to them, someone they could trade for money. And now even the very man who had taken her in as a child, who had been her only family, was willing to give her away for the sake of wealth. She sat in silence, her hands shaking as she listened to the plans being made for her future, a future she had no say in. All her life, she had lived in the shadows, dependent on others for even the smallest thing. But now she realized just how little she mattered to those around her. To them, she was just a blind girl, a girl who could be sold for a price. Tears fell down her face as she tried to hold back the emotions threatening to overtake her. She wanted to scream, to shout, to run away, but she stayed still, afraid of what might happen if she revealed that she had overheard it all. The weight of the truth hung heavily on her shoulders, and the silence of the garden felt like a cruel, suffocating reminder of how little control she had over her own life. The next morning, Maria was sitting by the piano, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing across the keys when Uncle Mike came into the garden with a serious look on his face. He stood by her, his presence making her stomach twist with unease. Maria, he began, his voice softer than usual, though still carrying that tone of authority. I've got something to tell you. There's a rich man who's very interested in marrying you. Maria froze, her fingers stopping mid-note. She had heard those words before, sold to a rich man. A deal made in the shadows. But hearing it from Uncle Mike's mouth made it feel real, like her life had been reduced to nothing more than a transaction. A rich man wants to marry me? Maria asked, her voice shaking, though she tried to sound strong. Yes, his name is Jeffrey. You'll marry him. It's a good thing, Maria. You'll have a future. Maria couldn't speak. All she could do was sit there, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. Mrs. Ruth came into the garden shortly after, looking pleased with herself, a grin spreading across her face. You're very lucky, Maria, she said, her voice sharp and cold. Do you know how many women would kill for an opportunity like this? Jeffrey could have anyone, but he picked you. You should be grateful. Maria turned her face toward Mrs. Ruth, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. Grateful? She repeated softly, her voice distant. Oh, don't be dramatic, dear, Mrs. Ruth said, a mocking tone creeping into her voice. This is your chance, Maria. A chance to have a life. The man has options, beautiful women. Women who aren't blind, but he's chosen you. You should count yourself lucky. Maria felt the sting of her words, but her eyes remained blank. She didn't know how to feel anymore. Was this really her chance? Or was it just another way for everyone around her to profit at her expense? Later that day, a package arrived at the house. It was from Jeffrey, the man who had bought her life. Maria's heart sank as she heard Uncle Mike's shout of excitement from the other room. She knew what it was before she even saw it, a gift, something meant to prepare her for what was to come. Uncle Mike entered the room holding a box in his hands. He smiled at Maria, his excitement clear. Look, Maria, it's for you. Jeffrey sent you something nice, a designer dress for your wedding. He placed the box in front of her, and Maria slowly opened it, her hands trembling. Inside was a beautiful pink designer dress, silky and smooth to the touch, its fabric gleaming in the light. It was a dress that screamed luxury, something she had never seen before, let alone worn. She could imagine how beautiful it would look on her, even though she couldn't see it. But as she ran her fingers over the delicate fabric, she felt an overwhelming sadness wash over her. This wasn't a dress for her wedding. This was a dress for her to play the part of the bride in a transaction, to be presented to Jeffrey as nothing more than a commodity wrapped in fine cloth. She wondered to herself, as she caressed the soft material, if Jeffrey even saw her. Did he see a blind girl? Or did he just have some fantasy about having a blind wife, someone who would never question him, never see through his facade? Maria swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no choice. The deal was done. She was going to marry Jeffrey, and her life, it seemed, had been written for her. All she could do was wonder, as her fingers continued to trace the lines of the dress, what kind of life awaited her at the end of it all. Was it really going to be a marriage, or just another prison, this time with a different kind of chain? The day of the wedding arrived with a sense of surrealism that Maria couldn't escape. It was a wedding that, in many ways, she had no part in planning, no say in. Yet she found herself in a world she had never dreamed of, caught up in the whirlwind of a man who had bought her life with money. The cruise ship was beyond anything she had ever seen, elegant, grand, and opulent. It gleamed against the vast sparkling ocean, its towering structure like a floating palace. The deck was adorned with beautiful white roses, their petals glistening in the sun, and delicate golden ribbons swayed gently with the breeze. The air smelled of salt and perfume, a mix of sea and luxury that made everything feel like a dream. Rich folks dressed in lavish attire mingled about, their laughter ringing out as they sipped champagne from crystal flutes. Maria could hear their voices, their whispers, the clicks of designer heels against the polished floor. She felt small, insignificant in this sea of wealth and extravagance. But she kept her composure. After all, she was a bride now, even if she didn't feel like one. She stood at the altar beside Jeffrey, her hand trembling slightly as it rested in his. He was handsome, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly. But to Maria, he was just a stranger, a man who had come into her life like a storm, taking away what little agency she had left. His face was calm, controlled, his smile polite but distant. She couldn't help but wonder if he even saw her as a person, or just as something to display, something to show off to his friends. The ceremony was grand, and the guests were all smiles, nodding, and whispering their approval. The officiant spoke in a deep, formal voice, his words floating over Maria like a cloud of detachment. She heard him speak about love, commitment, and the bond of marriage. But it all seemed so distant, so foreign to her. This was a contract in exchange for money, a transaction, not a union based on love. When the vows came, Jeffrey spoke confidently, his voice steady. Maria couldn't make out the exact words he said, but she knew they were rehearsed and meant nothing to him. He was already thinking about the business side of things, about the $20 million he had paid. She, on the other hand, simply nodded, repeating the words as though on autopilot. There was no passion in her voice, no real emotion. She was saying things because she had to. This was her reality now. The moment they were officially married, Maria felt a strange emptiness wash over her. She had hoped for something more, something real. But now, as the guests clapped and cheered, her mind was far from the celebration. She couldn't help but wonder what her future held with this man. Was she truly a wife in his eyes, or just another possession? After the ceremony, the celebration continued on the cruise ship, with the rich guests dancing and enjoying themselves, their laughter echoing through the decks. Maria couldn't focus on it, though. She was in a world of her own, her thoughts drifting to what awaited her back at Jeffrey's home, to the life she was now bound to. As the night fell, it was time to leave. Jeffrey, ever the gentleman, led her to an expensive, sleek black car waiting at the dock. The car was shiny, almost too perfect, the kind of car that made heads turn. It was a contrast to her reality, something so far removed from the small, cramped house she had once lived in with Uncle Mike. The doors opened, and she was gently guided inside, the leather seats soft beneath her. The interior of the car smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. The driver, dressed in a black suit, nodded at Jeffrey before starting the engine, and they were off, leaving the shimmering lights of the cruise ship behind. As the car moved through the quiet streets, Maria stared out of the window, her face barely visible in the reflection of the glass. The world outside was a blur. Everything felt distant and foreign, as if she were a spectator in her own life. She had no idea what to expect from Jeffrey. She didn't fully understand his intentions, his true feelings. Was he kind beneath his wealth? Was he someone she could ever trust? Or was she just another trophy for him to show off, a blind wife to add to his collection of luxuries? The car took a sharp turn, and Maria's thoughts returned to the present. She was going home with Jeffrey now. This would be her life, the life of a wife, but one that didn't truly belong to her. A wife to a man who saw her perhaps as nothing more than an object to be admired, a trophy to be displayed. As the sleek black car rolled into the driveway of Jeffrey's mansion, Maria felt a strange, overwhelming sense of resignation. This was her life now. She had no choice in the matter. She was going to be married to a man she barely knew. And in the silence of the car, as they pulled up to the gates of their new home, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever find freedom again. Would she ever have a voice in her own life? Or was this how it would always be, her future decided by the hands of others? The car came to a stop, and Jeffrey opened the door for her. She stepped out, her heart heavy, and walked into the house that would now be her prison, where she would live as a wife to a man whose true intentions she couldn't even begin to understand. Jeffrey led Maria into the grand house, each step taking her deeper into a world that felt increasingly unfamiliar. The walls were adorned with lavish decorations, gold trimmings, and chandeliers hanging from the ceilings. The air smelled of expensive perfumes, the kind that stung her nose with their overwhelming sweetness. It was a house that spoke of wealth, but to Maria, it felt cold and distant, as if she were an outsider looking in. As they reached the stairs, Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of her new reality. Everything in this house seemed to shine with an intensity that hurt her eyes. But at the same time, she felt a deep emptiness settle in her chest. This was her life now, a life she had never asked for. She was a stranger in her own marriage. They reached the room, and Jeffrey stopped by the door, his hand on the handle. He gave her a quick glance, his expression unreadable. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said, his voice still distant, as though she were just another guest in his home. "Show me to the bathroom," Maria requested, her voice trembling slightly, as if she were walking on thin ice, unsure of every movement. There was something about the house, about Jeffrey's silence, that made her feel as though she didn't belong. She felt like a fragile porcelain doll. One wrong move, and she might shatter. Without saying a word, Jeffrey nodded, guiding her toward the bathroom. The marble floors beneath her feet were cold, and the large mirrors lining the walls made the space feel even bigger, more impersonal. The door clicked behind her as Jeffrey let her in, his presence still looming like a shadow. As he stepped back, Maria took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body ease a little. She expected him to leave, to retreat. But what she didn't know was that he wasn't going anywhere. Jeffrey silently opened another door, one that led to a large bathtub. It was as if he had anticipated her every move, even though she hadn't said a word. Maria didn't notice this. She was already focused on something else. She turned to face the bathroom and unzipped her dress, the fabric slipping off her body and falling to the floor in a soft rustle. She stood there, her bare skin exposed to the cool air. She felt a strange sense of freedom as the dress pulled around her feet. For a brief moment, she was just Maria, no longer the blind girl, no longer the woman who had been sold. She was just herself, standing in the quiet room, unsure of what to expect next. It was then that Jeffrey, who had thought he was out of the room, turned around. His eyes widened, frozen in place as he caught sight of her. Maria didn't know it, but she had unknowingly become something else in his eyes, a vision of raw beauty. Her skin, flawless and untouched by the harshness of life, shimmered in the soft lighting. To Jeffrey, it was as if he were looking at a goddess, someone untouched by time or sorrow. Maria didn't notice his gaze, too caught up in her own thoughts. She was lost in the moment, unaware of the effect she had on him. For a brief second, the world outside the bathroom seemed to disappear. She stood in full glory, unaware that Jeffrey's breath had caught in his chest, his heart racing in a way he hadn't anticipated. Without a word, Jeffrey slowly retreated, silently slipping out of the room and quietly shutting the door behind him. He couldn't bring himself to say anything, to do anything. He simply left, the weight of the moment pressing down on him as he walked away, his mind reeling from the sight he had just witnessed. Maria, still unaware of his presence, turned back toward the bathroom, lost in her own world. She stepped into the shower, the warm water cascading over her skin, soothing the tension in her muscles. She had no idea how her life had taken this turn, how everything had spiraled so far beyond her control. All she could do was focus on the water, the rhythmic sound of it splashing against her skin. And outside the bathroom, Jeffrey stood, his back against the wall, his mind swirling with thoughts he couldn't express. The reality of his new life, of his marriage to Maria, had just shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. What was this feeling? What was it about her that made everything feel so unfamiliar? He had never expected this effect she had on him. But now, as he stood in the silence of the hallway, he realized he was already beginning to wonder if he had made a mistake, if this was all really what he wanted. But it was too late now. What emotions does this story stir within you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like. Subscribe to the channel to never miss another heartwarming tale. We'll see you in the next video.